Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, lived a farmer named Gopi. He was a kind man, with hands toughened by years of working the soil. But this year, his heart was as heavy as the clouds that refused to bring rain. Gopi walked to his field, his feet dragging through the dry, cracked earth. It was the peak of summer, a time when the land should be bursting with life. Instead, his field was barren, a dusty canvas of disappointment. He sighed, the sound lost in the vast emptiness. Field. My field is empty again, he whispered to himself. What am I going to do? If I can't deliver crops to the kingdom, the king will not be pleased. I'll be in serious trouble. He kicked a loose stone, frustration bubbling up inside him. The sun beat down relentlessly, mirroring the fire of anxiety in his chest. One scorching afternoon, just as Gopi was about to hang up his tools and his hopes, his shovel hit something hard. Clang! The metallic sound echoed in the silent field. What's that? Curiosity sparked within him, pushing aside his despair. He dropped to his knees and started digging with his hands, scooping away the dry soil. Soon, the top of an old clay pot emerged. It was large and weathered, covered in ancient markings. With a final grunt of effort, he heaved it out of the ground. He wiped the sweat from his brow and peered inside. It's empty, he said, his voice laced with renewed disappointment. After all that digging? For nothing. He felt a fool for getting his hopes up. Dejected, Gopi carelessly dropped his hoe into the pot and trudged over to the sparse shade of a lone tree to rest his weary body and mind. A short while later, feeling a little more rested, he walked back to gather his things. As he approached the pot, he stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. It couldn't be. Inside the pot were not one, but 100 identical hoes, packed tightly together. What? How can this be? I only had one hoe. His heart began to pound in his chest. Was he seeing things? Was the heat playing tricks on his mind? With trembling hands, he decided to test his theory. He picked up his shovel, the one that had started this whole strange episode, and carefully placed it inside the pot. He held his breath, watching. A faint shimmer seemed to ripple from the pot's rim. Moments later, just as before, 100 shovels appeared, clattering against each other. Gopi gasped, stumbling backward. This must be a magic pot. A wide grin spread across his face, chasing away the worry lines. He had found something truly extraordinary. Excitement surged through him like a rushing river. He carefully lifted the heavy pot, his earlier exhaustion forgotten, and rushed home. He had to be sure. He found a single chicken egg and gently dropped it in. Instantly, the pot was overflowing with fresh, white eggs. He tried an apple, and 100 crisp red apples appeared. Ski. He tore off a piece of bread, and 100 warm loaves materialized, their aroma filling his small cottage. This pot will change my life, he exclaimed, laughing with pure joy. I'll never have to worry about barren fields or an empty stomach ever again. True to his word, Gopi's life transformed overnight. Every morning he would use the pot to multiply food, clothes, and tools. He would take his endless supply of goods to the kingdom market stall. Once sparse, was now overflowing with the finest produce, the freshest bread, and the sturdiest tools. People flocked to him, amazed by his abundance. But his sudden and impossible success didn't go unnoticed. The other sellers, whose stalls now looked meager in comparison, grew suspicious. Their admiration curdled into jealousy. Where does he get all this? They'd mutter. His fields are as barren as ours. They watched him with narrowed eyes, whispering in corners. He must be hiding something. One grumbled to another. It's not natural. Finally, their envy got the better of them. They went to the royal soldiers, their voices low and conspiratorial. You should investigate Farmer Gopi. Find out his secret. The very next morning, 2 soldiers were dispatched to spy on Gopi. They hid in the bushes outside his small home, their eyes fixed on his every move. They watched as Gopi brought out the large clay pot. He looked around, then placed a single fluffy chick inside. Soldiers exchanged a look of confusion. Seconds later, their jaws dropped. Hundreds of chirping chicks suddenly filled the yard, running in every direction. One even hopped onto Gopi's head, and he laughed as he gently plucked it off. The soldiers were utterly stunned. This was magic, plain and simple. They raced back to the palace, breathless, to tell the king what they had witnessed. Before long, Gopi was summoned to the royal palace. He stood before the grand throne, clutching his precious pot nervously. The king, a man used to getting whatever he wanted, leaned forward, his eyes glittering with greed. "So, this is the source of your newfound wealth," he said, his voice booming through the hall. "Bring it here. This magic pot will enrich my entire kingdom. We will be the most powerful nation in the world." "But, my king," Gopi began, his voice trembling slightly. "Please, be careful with it. It's more powerful than you can imagine." The king waved a dismissive hand, ignoring the farmer's warning, snatched the pot, and, consumed by his own ambition, bent over to peer deep inside, as if to unlock its secrets with his gaze alone. In his haste, his foot slipped on the polished marble floor. With a loud cry and a heavy thud, the king tumbled headfirst right into the pot. A collective gasp filled the hall. The guards, the courtiers, everyone stared in horror. For a moment, there was a deafening silence. Then, the hall began to shake. A low rumbling emanated from the pot. Suddenly, out marched not one, not two, but 100 identical kings. Each one was dressed in the same royal robes, each wearing the same greedy expression. They poured out of the pot, filling the throne room. Chaos erupted. "I am the real king," one shouted, pointing at another. "Seize this imposter." Another roared, "No asterisk, I, asterisk, am the king. You are all fakes." A third bellowed. The soldiers stood frozen, their spears held uselessly at their sides. Suppose. Who were they supposed to obey? The kings began to shout, argue, and even fight amongst themselves, each one absolutely certain of his claim to the throne. The palace descended into absolute madness. Amid the pandemonium, Gopi saw his chance. He realized the pot, this thing he thought was a blessing, brought nothing but greed, confusion, and chaos. It was too dangerous for anyone to possess. While the 100 kings were busy trying to dethrone each other, Gopi quietly grabbed the pot and slipped out of the palace, completely unnoticed. He ran and ran, putting as much distance as he could between himself and the chaos he had inadvertently caused. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of a tall, rocky cliff overlooking a deep ravine. He looked down at the pot in his hands. "This pot brings only greed and confusion," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "It must be destroyed." With all his strength, he raised the pot above his head and hurled it over the edge. T watched it fall, tumbling end over end, until it hit the rocks below and shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, its magic vanishing into dust forever. From that day on, something wonderful happened. When Gopi returned to his field, he found tiny green shoots pushing their way through the soil. His barren land began to flourish, yielding the healthiest crops he had ever grown. He finally understood the lesson the magic pot had taught him. True wealth doesn't come from a magical shortcut, it comes from hard work, patience, and the sweat of your own brow. And so, Farmer Gopi lived the rest of his days in peace and prosperity, content and grateful. Not for the magic he had lost, but for the wisdom he had found. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that make you think. We'll see you in the next video.